Welcome to Slalom Supply Chain Fireside Chat. I am your host Harshad Kanvinde, leader of Slalom's global supply chain practice. My guest today, John Church, former Chief Transformation and Chief Supply Chain Officer at General Mills. We talk about John's experience in successfully transforming General Mills supply chain, creating a culture that drove strong alignment with business objectives and embodied the ethos of continuous improvement. Hey, welcome everyone to the Supply Chain Fireside Chat with me. Today, my guest is John Church, former Chief Supply Chain Officer and Chief Transformation Officer at General Mills, who have led General Mills on a successful supply chain transformation journey over the last several years. So, John, always a pleasure to talk to you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Harshad. Good to see you.
So John, I think I will not do justice telling my audience about your journey. So why don't we start off with you introducing yourself and kind of um, telling us about your journey in supply chain. And obviously, General Mills is a huge part of it. But let's hear from you how you came to supply chain. What kind of things made you stick with supply chain and all the amazing things that you did?
Sure, terrific. Thanks. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and when I left school, I joined General Mills. It's the only employer I've ever had, 33 and a half years, retiring just earlier this year. But I started in research and development and product development. I worked on new products and established products, mostly breakfast cereals in our Big G cereals division. And because that's a very process intensive, large scaled kind of a business, yes, you're working on molecules as an R&D scientist, but inevitably, if you're successful, that gets into a plant. And so that's systems and people and operations and suppliers and all of those sorts of things. And so I was lucky enough to work on a couple products that went into the marketplace that required me sort of to understand who were the suppliers and where do we get things from? How did that get into our manufacturing plants? Run a number of tests and do capital projects and scale up. And so after about 5 years of an R&D career, I got tapped on the shoulder by the person who at that time at General Mills ran technology and operations, which was both R&D and the supply chain group that we had just formed. This was in the early 90s. And said, hey, we want you to take a cross-functional role into a manufacturing plant. And so I moved to a plant, actually in a cruel twist of fate. The plant that I had launched a very complex new product into and had to figure out how to do it reliably, consistently, safely, and make money at it. And so I did that. The beauty of that was I knew the technology. The part that was really interesting for me was I learned all the things I probably should have designed differently had I thought about what that scale up would look like, what the system would look like longer term. I moved in operations for about 10 years and then came back to our headquarters as we acquired the Pillsbury company in 2000. It was essentially an acquisition of an equal-sized company. And so there was a lot of complexity. I led a small team of internal consultants to figure out what the new General Mills would look like. From there, I led our engineering organization, and then job expanded. Since 2008, I led the global supply chain. That role started largely North American because the footprint of the company was 85% North American. But over time, we made acquisitions and our business grew. And I would say that probably I was as likely at the end of my career to be outside the country in a plant as I was in the United States. And along the way, picked up accountability for IT, shared services, our corporate security, those sorts of things, in addition to our end-to-end supply chain practice, and importantly, sustainability and how we operate, how we show up in the marketplace.
That's an amazing journey, John. And I think what always amazes me, the tenure has its benefits, right? So you understand every corner of the organization, not just the systems and the functional aspect of it, but the people and what buttons to push to get things done, and what works and what doesn't.
In fairness, the opposite side of the coin is it also has its limitations because you have to work much harder to bring in new perspective, you have to have a mindset that you're not going to allow yourself to get old. You have to continue to benchmark. You have to be, active in consortia, and you have to be networking with a bunch of people like yourself to bring in new ideas, or else your plan from 3 years ago looks a lot like your plan 3 years from now, and that's not good for anybody.
Good to have you as the leader of their organizations, who reminds that how important consultants are.
There you go.
but I think in our job as well, I think supply chain is the talk of the town, especially for last couple of years. All the people who have been in supply chain for longer know that the underlying problem, why those are surfacing at the level they are, those aren't new. I think the supply chain transformation needs were always there. So the General Mills story, what amazes me, John, and that's kind of your story too. So the supply chain transformation have yielded real results for last several years. It's not just kind of an idea on the paper or fancy PowerPoints. It has already happened. There's a machine that keeps spinning and giving results, no matter whether it's revenue focused, no cost focused, it's kind of margin focused. So I think that would be a very interesting and important story to tell.
Sure.
So my next question is supply chain transformation. You have been on that journey for last 15 years at least, or maybe more than that. I think early 2000 to till now. So what started that journey? How did you frame that question? What does even transformation even mean, and what necessitated that, and how did you? So tell us about that journey, John, and maybe as you tell that journey, obviously there are lessons learned along the way.
Sure.
So we'd love to hear from you about your journey on transformation.
It's first of all, I would say early on, a lot of the things we were doing didn't feel like transformation. It seemed like evolution rather than revolution. It was things like operations excellence, continuous improvement, lean, those sorts of things that we'd apply. And maybe like everybody else, we started with our manufacturing operations. We owned that we were a company that had about 85-90% of its production inside and only 10% outside and external manufacturers. And so being excellent at what we were, making sure that we did that, starting with safety, moving to with human safety and personnel safety, consumer safety, moving to quality, getting to service, and then cost as an outcome of that became a mindset that we had to establish. You can spend a lot of time talking about cost, but from our standpoint, particularly since we have a very intimate relationship with our consumer, they literally ingest our product, and their trust in us is such that we need to make sure we start with safety, and that is the foundation of everything we do. The good news is that's an ethos in General Mills that goes back 150 years, and I was able to sort of build upon it and leverage it. But as we were working that agenda, it really became the foundation for resilience. The idea of excellence, of predictability, of a foundation to build from in your manufacturing core allowed us to start extending how we thought about process changes and process management. And so while we got good at manufacturing, maybe not as good as we needed to be, and certainly not as good as General Mills will be over time, we realized that same principle of understanding the process, driving lean, could extend into our supply base and out to our customer base. And so we started looking much broader end to end. And along that way, early in my leadership time in supply chain, the economy evolved. It became a much more global economy, and China's demand signal started causing significant inflation in raw materials, and the markets were starting to speculate. Financial speculation was happening in commodities, et cetera, causing us to have to start being much more holistic in terms of, one, how we ran our business, but also how we took hedging positions, how we managed risk. We did those kinds of things. So we went from let's get our manufacturing plants right. The next sort of foundation for us was becoming intimate with our business partners. When I joined General Mills way back when, it was sales, you take care of revenue; marketing, you take care of new products and grow market share; and supply chain, you just deliver the stuff and manage costs so that we make a lot of money. That became a lot harder when the world got disruptive, when it got global, when digital technology and your consumers started changing their attitudes. Suddenly, the idea of everybody just does their part and it adds up didn't work out anymore. And so we spent a lot of time building a holistic, integrated approach with our businesses. And so it wasn't the business did whatever they wanted and supply chain made it happen, which was the supply chain I probably inherited. It became instead, hey, we got to think about how we do this together. You guys are going to run the business, but we need to be partnered with you to let you see where the commodity markets are going, what the intent, what your decisions are doing from a cost, a profit, a reliability standpoint, so that you can start being a better general manager. That evolution was maybe the most important. And to be honest, as I look, Harshad, one of the ones that I think people still have yet to do. You start working on elegant graduate level supply chain tricks and you forget that you exist in a business. Unless you are literally a supply chain company, you exist in a business, and the decision making is mostly done by the commercial partners. And those folks have to see supply chain not as a necessary evil, but as an integral part of the business in order to make sure that you can navigate. I guess maybe we've seen that more in the last couple of years during COVID than any other time. Companies that had their act together could figure out how to run integrated control towers that were not only how's the supply chain running, but what's the impact on our customers? How do we think about that? Differentiated themselves in this market and in this economy in a way that others weren't able to do. And so that was certainly my key learning, is that I could work on supply chain all day and we could be great at what we did, but I didn't work for a supply chain company. I worked for a consumer products company, making sure our business leaders and our supply chain leaders were the same people was a huge part of it. And then ensuring that they thought end to end. And that was a 10-year journey that will be a 100-year journey as we get more sophisticated and more knowledgeable.
That's super well said, right, John? I think we see that kind of distinction whether you work for IT or business and IT different thing. It's not. I mean, which hat you wear for your day job today, maybe you're in IT, you still need to understand enough of the business that you work on. It's not that you're making the decisions on the business behalf, but that seamless integration can't happen just at the process level. As a person, I think you need to understand both sides. As an operator, you need to also understand enough of the maintenance, and it's kind of the same goes on and on, right? What you're saying.
Absolutely. And as a result of that integration, that intimacy, that partnership, General Mills created a practice they call holistic margin management, which is let's take a look at not only how we do stuff, which is the job the supply chain is supposed to do. Let's get better at doing what we're supposed to do every day, just a little bit better, continuous improvement. But more importantly, what are the things we can change holistically in order to free up margin that we can then reinvest back in our business? We can reinvest in growth. We can return that to the shareholders. That practice and the level of intimacy was what our key benchmark was, and we ended up generating on an ongoing basis, and I'm not sharing anything that isn't public, between 4 and 5% of our cost of sales every year. We expected that we would save 4 to 5% year over year over year over year, not on a cumulative basis, 4 to 5% each year based on the previous year's cost. And our business leaders started understanding that that was a remarkable competitive advantage. Now, it's one that they had to own. We had to, when you talk about holistic, it's not the supply chain's job to do that. It is the business's job to figure that out. And the supply chain is a enabler and a vessel for, provoking and a prompter of those kinds of things, sometimes the executor of it. But that differentiation still is part of General Mills's core strategy, and they think it, I think it leads to a competitive advantage.
And I think
now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, John. I have a question on that, but please continue, and I'll save it.
So the important part about this holistic, the holistic nature is that because you don't get to count the savings twice, you count it once. It leads to this culture of transformation. If you're going to build 4 to 5% productivity into your business model, then you can't be satisfied with marginal returns. These have to be things that have you reinvent and start rethinking. That leads you not only to your, and it starts at the product level, make sure you don't over engineer it for what the consumer wants, but it goes all the way through your supply base. Am I asking for anything that is differential, that costs you money, that if I changed would free up dollars for both of us? To your customers, are there offerings I could give you that would make things more profitable for you, which would allow you to reinvest back in our business? That end-to-end thinking, it became a platform for extending how we think about holistic, and started this model of continually transforming. So maybe why don't you ask your question, because I think then you realize the next level there is, where does digital fit in, and
Yeah,
how
yeah.
does
I think
data
the
sort of
question I have, what you said, and I remember from our earlier conversations. It's a journey, and it's a decade long journey. It's not just 1 year or 5 year or 7
for sure.
years, 10 plus years kind of journey. And the holistic margin management as a concept might be staying the same, but how you implement that early in the journey, it's very different than what you were doing last year, right?
Absolutely.
So that whole thing. So the foundation element here, yeah, you're building the foundation, but foundation is not in the sense that I'm building data lakes or I'm building SAP, and it's not rigid.
Culture.
The conceptual foundation.
It's
And I
culture,
remember, I
it's
think,
business process, it's leadership, it's intentionality.
because John, I remember, I think as you started the journey, just to kind of, I mean, you are getting your hands dirty in the sense that you and the CEO and other leaders doing reviews with all these different business unit and around HMM. But 5 years on, that your engagement might be completely different. So maybe talk about that
Sure.
evolution. I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's an
great.
important.
So as you start going on this journey, and I'm a believer in doing it somewhere, highlighting and learning, and then highlighting it so that it becomes the envy of everybody else, because that tends to change culture over time. General Mills is a big company, and so we had a particular business with a particular business leader where our product offerings were complex, probably too complex for what we promised the consumer, and to be honest, what they wanted. As such, we had built in cost of design, cost of inventory, cost of complexity, cost of manufacturing challenges. All of those things sort of started at the business model level. And so we went after it, and we totally changed the results of the business. We were able to drain costs out of the business without changing the offering to the consumer at all. The consumer didn't get shortchanged. As a matter of fact, we became expert at what they wanted and gave them exactly what that was. They were more satisfied with our product. But we then took that money and could put it back into growing the business. Well, you highlight that person in a newsletter, you highlight that person at the company meeting, you highlight that business example. Pretty soon, everybody wants a bit of that. But we realized is that those were important episodes, but it wasn't going to lead to a cultural change. And so, to your point, the CEO and myself would sit down with all the business leaders, and they would review their plans for holistic margin management. And then it would be the CEO's job, my job, the CFO's job to connect the dots and say, that's interesting. What I heard over here, what we heard in Latin America, over in Europe, you may want to, that sort of connection led to more scale, more generation of ideas, bigger thoughts and ideas. That was super important to, again, create this mindset around, yes, it starts at your business and it's your money, but the idea could be bigger for all of us. Over time, that became unnecessary. It became when you're delivering 4 and 5% productivity every year as an input to your business, it's pretty hard to do without. And then the only role we played at the corporate level at that point was to ensure that all businesses were continuing to drive this advantage. Some years we wouldn't have. We would say internally and externally, 4 to 5% is what we'd expect from a productivity standpoint. In a 2% inflation year, you're going to have a lot of money to invest. In a 9% inflation year, you're going to have to pull other levers in the business in order to offset inflation. On average, we're going to have 4 to 5% inflation. And on average, we're going to be able to offset that with productivity and holistic margin management. But what I would tell you is there was never an average year. And so what we had to do was create a system that held ourselves accountable, because unfortunately, when you have this transformative innovation process, you can't just say, well, I don't need it this year, so I'm going to take my eye off the ball and go do something else. You have to keep it alive, because these projects aren't have an idea, implement. You might have an idea a year and a half ago that got implemented this year. Those are the things that you have to keep nurturing. So you have to manage the portfolio of those kinds of ideas and system changes, just like you manage your new product portfolio.
So there are so many good insights there, John. So one is that you're not hiring a consultant and they give you this silver bullet and then you go off your yacht and sip Blue Label or whatever. You're getting your hands dirty. There is no
Absolutely
substitute to that. I think even that CEO and you and CFO meeting with the business, it's symbolic, right? So you're not just saying supply chain is important. It's at the table there as you review the holistic margin and management targets.
Yes.
It's not just the CFO doing that, or it's not just the CEO doing that, or their presidents of it. Supply chain is at the table driving that innovation. So that has its own merits.
Absolutely, but an important learning there is that supply chain is at the table, but the business person is the one leading the discussion.
Driving
we never wanted to create this as look at how much great the supply chain is doing. It was instead, look at how healthy our business is. Look at the things we're driving, because nothing you do from a functional level ever sees the marketplace if the business doesn't buy in. And so it was really important that the process was led, the results were communicated, and all of the sort of incremental funds went to the business. It didn't go to the supply chain.
Another thing I love, and many times I think people confuse, the long-term thinking doesn't mean that in short term you're sitting on your ass and not doing anything. So long-term thinking, your profitability goals and ROI might be long-term, that you're not getting 4% just tomorrow. There is substantial.
It took a while to get there.
Happen, right? But at the same time, just because it will take a while to happen, it's not that people don't have targets to meet tomorrow. I think there is that balance. And one thing that you said, so the foundational element. So many times we often transformational, everyone is interested in transformation. Immediately there are two camps. So one is like, okay, give me the magic bullets, and there are like just bringing stuff out of their hats, and it turns into pilot purgatory. Like there is AI, machine learning, and blockchain and whatnot, and none of those things are magic bullets. And there is second camp, I call them duct tapers, but like put duct tape on everything, and the answer lies somewhere in between. But there is also a notion of, hey, we are not that sophisticated, so let's focus on foundational. And what typically that means is, it might be a technology foundation, ERP or data and this and that goes on for the plans is 4-year, 5-year. And I think that you're just creating excuses to hide behind. I mean, foundational thing, yes, necessary. But what you said, I think what's super important, that culture as the biggest foundation there. Like celebrating heroes and whatnot. I think celebrating successes, creating momentum. So there are, even creating culture has hundreds of those individual things that made that culture the way it is, but that becomes the foundation. How exactly, what tool you deploy and what specific things you do, you're kind of leaving it up to once the culture is, the foundation is built, those people will innovate on themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, my approach and my learning as a leader, which maybe, everyone else's results may vary, right? But is that the supply chain is way too complex, and way too complex today for sure, for the head of supply chain to be making all of the decisions and driving the agenda. Instead, the head of supply chain creates the culture, ensures its health, makes sure the direction is generally right. And then you allow people who are committed, safe, and motivated to go find and bring those innovative ideas. And then you're constantly, as the head of supply chain, looking for, is that scalable or not? And if it's not, is it okay for it to be different because it's isolated enough that it won't fragment and I won't have 1,000 points of light that never focus into a laser beam? Or is it instead something that's a great idea, but we need to find something that works in China and in the US, because just working in China doesn't, isn't going to get it done for us. That's the role that I found to be most important as our supply chain evolved, as I evolved as a leader. And the digital journey is, maybe the hallmark for all of that, right? There's hundreds of people providing solutions. There's and some of everyone says they can all talk to one another. Everyone says they can deal with whatever your data looks like. Everybody's in the, and the reality is all of that resilience we built, all the foundational things we built are critical for then allowing the systems to take over. And I would tell you that my biggest fear was that we would bring systems and automation to a process that we weren't really good at. And then we would lose sort of the understanding of what the machines were doing. And then we wouldn't be able to add any value.
Right.
We'd be only as good as the programming, because we had lost the understanding of where the physical and the information supply chains actually met. And so I looked for people who could really understand both. They knew what a case of cereal did and how it turned into a cube and how it moved in a truck. And they knew what the ones and zeros look like in our ERP system, and more importantly, on the applications that we hung off of it. Being able to make that translation is super important nowadays. And I think
Super
that
rare.
everybody, and super rare, but the provider wants to say, I can deal with whatever you got, and maybe they can, but that doesn't make you any better. Then you're letting the provider run your supply chain, which if you're in a business where supply chain isn't strategic and critical, is a potential approach. I think that there are probably other businesses where your supply chain can be a competitive advantage, and until it's not, you need to be very thoughtful in terms of what you have inside versus outside.
Yeah, that's why I hate when people tout POCs, right? So proof of concepts. Like proof of concept, most of the time it becomes just the technical proof of concept. Yeah, can you add 1 + 1 and say 2? Yeah, it's expected. It should be table stakes. You don't need to run an experiment for that.
Sure.
But
Right.
the experimentation should happen understanding the consumer, and do you really understand? Do you have a hypothesis, and that works or not? And that gets completely lost. I mean, everyone wants to work like a Zuckerberg and Jobs and startups and whatnot, and fail fast and MVP. And like, you don't need an MVP to prove that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. You need paper and pencil.
Correct. And the other side of that is, just because 1 + 1 = 2, it doesn't mean that when you're in the boardroom or you're in your staff meeting that everybody comes up with 2 as the answer. So, an example would be as we went on a planning transformation journey, and while we were elegant in a lot of things, we were late to the game in transforming our planning operations. There's a lot of manual, a lot of interface. The data wasn't good. We had brilliant people who would sort of brute force. We had excellent service, but it wasn't because we were elegant. It was because we were committed. We knew that wasn't a long-term situation. That wasn't sustainable long-term. We were going to have people turnover, and we were going to have knowledge that retired. We were going to be in a place where the business got more and more complex, and we needed to be faster. And as such, brute force and humankind was not going to be able to solve the problems. And so we needed an automated, integrated, solver-based kind of solution. All great. And to your point, that can be done. Everybody can do that. You can buy lots and lots. The question is, does it enable the business's success? Just because you've got a great supply plan and do you have a great demand plan? Are you getting the information in? Are you able to build the communication lines between your supply side and demand side such that you can be faster in your response to the customer, which makes you advantaged? Does your business understand what this new capability can drive so that they can exploit it? Because just being easier to plan is interesting, but it's hard to drive returns there. The return comes from, have you built the culture and the business process so that your newfound agility, your newfound accuracy, your newfound resilience allows you to differentiate in the marketplace? And so as we did our proof of concepts, it wasn't to see if the math worked. It was to see if we could then do neat stuff with the math.
Exactly. So it's not, and we are going into very interesting, close to heart kind of territory. So indulge me a little bit here.
Yeah.
But it's like one mental framework that I use, that typically things fail, or most of the supply chain problems need 4 elements to solve. So yeah, knowledge is one, or visibility is one, but it's just one of 4. There is collaboration that needs to happen. There is decision making. The knowledge needs to aid the decision making, but ultimately all of that should result into action, right? So the action happens in transportation, action happens in manufacturing, action happens in purchasing. There are the dollars are made or saved, right? Those transactions.
Yep.
Planning in itself doesn't give you dollars. Something needs to be done with that plan.
Correct.
And many times
Absolutely.
people focus so much on just visibility, or so much on just collaboration, and not all 4. And somewhere this concept gets lost, that you don't need to be perfect in all 4, but you need to be true to the problem that you're trying to solve. If you want to save transportation dollars, for that you need certain amount of visibility, and you don't need to solve the world hunger when you go after visibility.
Correct.
True to the problem, and attack all 4 elements. And that's a very non-trivial problem, mainly because as I see even consulting and the product vendors and so on, that whole unifying business model doesn't exist. I mean, you can't have, so somewhere that comes to a John Church to weave all that together. Yep. and own the problem, and get the right partners to solve all those things. But someone needs to own those all 4 and that common thread. And that's a very challenging thing, as I'm realizing and getting more and more experience in this space.
Well, and the thing that makes it even more challenging is now you got to go justify the returns, and the returns aren't based on I've reduced my inventory at the same service levels. It's I'm able to grow revenue. I'm able to, and so those things change. Count on everybody to sign up and everybody be part of it. The other thing that, and I love your point, Harshad. One of the first things we had to do was establish data governance and data policies, and an ongoing practice that said, how are we going to keep this clean enough? Now, I will tell you, it took us a long time to go on the systems journey, because I had lots of people that said, our data is terrible, we can't start. And the answer is, it's probably good enough. And we'll find out where it's wrong and we'll fix it. But mostly we have to make sure it doesn't get worse as we go, because we've put some policies and practices together. Well, most of the data cleansing to get it good enough, fit for purpose, as we've done more digital transformations, this idea of fit for purpose is, I suddenly understand what that means. If you're 85% right, you're still 10 times better than the person sitting there making a guess as to what the answer is. And so as the systems start working, they continuously improve because you find errors, you correct them, et cetera. But this data cleansing and the data governance stuff, there's no return in that. That's not where the return is. Exactly. And then we're going to install a planning system. Well, how much is that going to get me? Yeah, actually, there's not much return in that either. I might save some people or redeploy them. I might have lower inventories. So when CFO, when do I get the return? And the answer is, well, when we start leveraging it as a business. And so because these things tend to be foundational, and you do this before you do this, before you do this, I'm spending money here and I'm spending money here, and then the return will come. Your CFO needs to have a level of intimacy and understanding of the journey, or else they'll never want to get started. You'll never be able to afford data cleansing for the sake of data cleansing. Exactly. Or putting in bureaucracy, as it's termed, I like to be putting in governance to keep your data straight, in order to ensure everything stays right, until you're actually leveraging that for a business purpose. And that's something that the business leaders and the CFO has to go on the long walk with you.
No, I think so. We like automatically, organically started discussing a lot of digital, John. So let me take a pause and ask the digital transformation, or maybe that's the wrong word, and we should kind of ditch that because it becomes so heavy, and then the point what you're making. There are hundreds of smaller things that you need to do to get on a transformation journey. What I see happening, digital transformation, and it as if it becomes like you either succeed or fail in transformation. No, right? So it's not 1 or 0. There are so many small things you do, and some you succeed, some you fail, you still keep moving forward. And
Right.
somewhere that continuous improvement ethos gets lost, because you're always looking for that ROI thing. For example, you're always looking for ROI in everything, and maybe that's why it gets stalled and paused. Or maybe you're not being rigorous enough, and that's why you see a lot of action and doesn't. So somewhere in the middle, I think that the whole world, or whole world of supply chain, at least the whole language of we are here to solve problems, that might be the problem in itself, because solving problem has finality to it, versus continuous improvement is, it
Correct.
allows you to just, okay, get better than yesterday. As you said, at 85% of the data cleansed, good enough, or fit for purpose. You don't need
Right.
to be 100%. So don't even try to solve the problem. I think that's kind of at a broader scale. Maybe the problem is never getting solved, because new problems will come and it will make more. So how did you manage that at General Mills, or maybe even post General Mills? What are your thoughts on the cultural aspect of digital transformation,
Yep.
and why it gets stalled? I have not seen many successful examples, right? So there is a lot of talk, but
Yes.
unfortunately,
I think that first of all, as I sat as a sitting chief supply chain officer, I was convinced wherever I was miles behind everybody else. I was clearly lagging. The reality is that's not really true. There are some examples of people that are way out in front, but at the end of the day, it remains to be seen if the big horsepower engine they've created with their data, their knowledge, their visibility, and those things is connected to a business that can actually drive and cause action to happen. I think it. So at General Mills, as I mentioned, we were aided by the fact that we built this intimacy with our business leaders. Understood their supply chains. They understood the challenges of their customers. They knew how these kinds of things would help. And we spent lots of time talking about, when we went on a digital transformation, the planning journey, we had business leaders that were on the steering committee. When we talked very openly about what was going to be required of our sales team with the customers in order to leverage this new capability. And those are the things that I think stand in the way of most people. Every supply chain leader can look and say, I install a system, I know how it's going to improve my supply chain numbers. But that connection to the business is the part that I still think people lack. And so why do these things fail? In my experience, and as I've left General Mills, I have a chance to talk to lots of people pretty intimately about their business. I think we assume that most big sophisticated companies have figured out the primary stuff. Like, if I had perfect knowledge of where everything was, that doesn't make my plants run any better. It doesn't make the trucker show up on time.
right.
It does, they haven't built sort of the fiber and the foundation and the resilience around just navigating their business today. And so now that they're a lot smarter, it doesn't necessarily make them better. Now, the good news is, if they're a lot smarter and their people are now not doing things they used to do, I used to take the model and say, we need to take the 80% of the work that we're doing today and have that done by the system automatically. So you can take that same mindset and solve the problems we don't know how to solve yet. That's where good stuff starts to happen. But it starts with a foundation of excellence. And so, you asked about what were my learnings along the way. Your internal operations have to be good enough to deal with the fact that you're going to learn a lot more. It's either going to make you better, or it's going to make you more frustrated because you can see all the problems.
Right.
It won't solve those problems. Secondly, the intimacy with the business, the understanding of, just because the supply chain is better doesn't mean we'll have a better business model. Similarly, just because you've invented the best product in the whole world doesn't mean we know how to make it. And
Yep.
as such, those two things have to link up. And if you haven't built that first culture and business process, it becomes super problematic to get at those returns. And then lastly, I do think that there is a wanting to boil the ocean, and instead I would take the approach of, can we make this so that we are integrated in our approach on a super important part of our business that's visible, and then scale and expand. I don't believe that the best way to drive transformation anywhere is build a foundational layer everywhere, and then build the next one, and then build the next one, because sometimes the paybacks aren't super compelling and the
Yep.
work is very hard. And so
Yep.
if you can't see the benefit of your work, no one's going to outlast that journey. Instead, you find a business that is ripe for fixing. You find a need that you want to address. You get excited about it, and you will find people coming out of the woodwork. We used to talk about the transformation journey, and we wouldn't actually staff, other than a very small group of people, any of these projects. And yet we'd have a lunch and learn, and 300 people would take time out of their day to show up, because they're like, we know this is messed up. How can we make this better? They were super excited about it because we were fixing real problems, and they wanted to be part of those solutions. That's the way you can start moving
That's
things
well
ahead.
said, because once you have that and inspire, people are already willing to, I mean, everyone has good intentions and everyone wants to do a good job. So you
Mhm.
find that right problem to energize people and inspire people. That's kind of most of your change management done there. I mean, most of the times people ask this question. I was talking to a pretty big company in your backyard, their innovation group, and the point was, hey, we have this innovation group and we have developed this supply chain apps and this and that, very fancy. But then, you know what? Our people don't understand, and it takes a lot of if you solve the right problems and create the apps for the right things, you don't have to, as
No,
your point, right? People show up, people take time out of their day if the problem itself is energizing, and they
absolutely.
see the real value.
If you know, in moving an organization forward, you have to be super clear, and your organization has to be accountable for what it's supposed to do. And then your job as the leader is to remove barriers.
Yeah.
And when you can solve someone's real pain point, because they're very clear on what they want to do, but they're not able to do it with the current situation you've got, they will work tirelessly to help you make their jobs easier. And you will be working on the right stuff, because you've been clear on what the business needs. You know that people feel like they can make a difference, and then you enable their success by, through servant leadership, and providing tools and skills, and removing barriers.
You know what, John? I think nowadays there is the new analogy I've started using is that of iOS and App Store. Like as a
Mhm.
leader or as a supply chain, whatever solution provider, the reality of the matter is that people know their business, people know their problem. You just need to enable all these different people, call them app developers, develop their own apps and solve the
Mhm.
problem. Because the behavior what we see is that you might have the most fanciest Ferrari of the planning solution. What the
Yep.
planners do, they download the data and build their own Excel models anyway. Right.
Yep.
So
And that is a little bit of my fear, right? Because the problem is, then I move that planner, and in that business, they're used to dealing with this app, and
right,
they say, well, but I only use that app.
right.
And then you end up getting work effort loss. What I used to say, and so here's how I would try to fight that. The reason the App Store works is because Apple has decided what are the rules of iOS.
Exactly.
And if you want to run on my platform, here are the rules. As a consumer, now suddenly I can have some degree of flexibility and choice, because at the end of the day, I know it runs at scale on iOS.
Yeah.
Similarly, at General Mills, I used to say, you know what, we're building a tree here. I want the trunk of the tree to be as big as possible. That's the one that feeds all of the leaves. And so, to the extent that's iOS and Apple, the fact that our most sophisticated, most complex, most data rich business is going to have lots and lots of branches and twigs and leaves, and the other one may just have a branch because it's less sophisticated, that's okay, as long as they're still on the same darn tree.
And the trunk
If
is
they
solid.
start planting a different tree, then I got a problem.
Then it's a problem. Yeah, absolutely. I think we are close to our. We can go on for days, John, and I. There are so many topics couldn't even touch. Maybe next time.
Sure.
But always a pleasure, John. Thanks a lot for visiting us, and thanks a lot for telling us about your journey. And maybe there is part 2 and part 3 and part 4 that we need to do.
Terrific, Harshad. Great to see you. Thanks for the time today.